Welcome to this training webinar aimed at providing leaders with information about the role of nominee on inspection from November 2025. The role of the nominee model is, of course, long established in further education and skills, and we're using the success of this model across a wider range of our remits. Therefore, for current nominees, there'll be little change to the role. This training will act then as a refresher through the lens of the renewed education framework. Please find the main aims of this session listed above. The nominee role across our education remits within the renewed inspection framework is intended to foster greater collaboration, increase inspection transparency, and streamline the inspection process. The nominee supports Ofsted's ambition to reset our relationship with those we regulate and inspect, working collaboratively with them to put children and learners first. This in turn will help us strengthen inspection dialogue via a single, trained point of contact.
Here is a visual plan of the session. We will break this into 4 distinct parts, starting with the role of the nominee. We will now look at the role of nominee and how it can work on inspection. The nominee and lead inspector will develop a close working relationship throughout the inspection that can streamline and strengthen communication through the inspection process. We will explore the role of nominee more fully shortly, but here is a quick overview of what routinely the nominee role is and where the limitations are. The nominee role will vary slightly by provider depending on the size and complexity of setting, but there are routine elements that thread through most inspections. Helping with inspection logistics is key, from the point of planning onwards, which we will cover in more detail later. Being the conduit of communication between leaders, staff and the inspection team and lead inspector. Keeping a watchful eye on staff well-being and flagging any concerns to the lead inspector that might arise around this and helping to discuss solutions. Constructively challenging emerging evidence that sits at odds with what the provider feels is the case and steering inspectors to the supporting evidence. Nominees may also be involved in undertaking joint inspection activities. This serves 2 main purposes. First, it increases transparency about how the inspection process works, and second, it enables the nominee to see and hear exactly what inspectors do, which can aid the dialogue as evidence emerges through the inspection. There are a few limitations with the role of nominee. In order to streamline inspection as much as possible, we stipulate 1 nominee per provider. In FES, there is also the option for a shadow nominee. Providers, if they wish, may have a shadow nominee, an employee of the provider, for staff development purposes, as well as their nominee. The shadow nominee will act as an observer. They will not contribute to discussions with inspectors, but may take notes and assist with other arrangements. This does not affect the role of the nominee. We also ask that the nominee is not based full-time in the allocated inspection base room. This is because inspectors may have to have sensitive conversations that require a degree of privacy. And finally, nominees are often involved in the ongoing reflection meetings and end-of-day team meetings. They are also present in the grading meetings towards the end of inspection and can discuss the evidence, but at the point inspectors switch to proposing grades, nominees will no longer be able to contribute to this. Inspectors will propose grades based on the evidence they have gathered. Nominees will observe the discussion and process, but will be unable to influence any further to the conversation at the point of grading. Let's explore the role a bit further. So what is the value of having a nominee? Take a few minutes to think about what the value of the nominee is to your organisation, but also consider the value to you as an individual. This is not an exhaustive list, and you may have thought of others. The value of the nominee for the provider includes how they support leaders to understand why things are emerging as they are. The nominee supports a 2-way dialogue and helps raise key points throughout the inspection. They provide 1 point of contact for questions from the inspection team and staff, streamlining communications. Through the nominee, a provider will have a member of staff who has a more in-depth first-hand understanding of the inspection process, and the shadow nominee will develop an understanding of the nominee role. For the individual, they gain first-hand experience of the inspection through their close proximity to the different parts of inspection, and the role can help to enhance a range of skills such as leadership, collaborative working, strategic thinking, and communication. This is not exhaustive. There is also a lot of softer skills that can be developed through the role, such as support for staff, constructive feedback, influencing and presentation skills. As the slide says, the role can be beneficial in helping to manage the logistics of inspection on complex and/or larger multi-site providers where there may be many moving parts and large numbers of stakeholders involved. What are we saying are important elements to carry out the role of nominee? The nominee should have a detailed understanding of the provider's programs and operations, be sufficiently senior to ensure the cooperation of staff at all levels, and have authority to carry out the role with autonomy. This is because it should enable the cooperation of staff at all levels and help inspectors understand the provision and general operations. In summary, then, the nominee role is a very important one on any inspection. The nominee aids communication between inspectors and provider staff and helps to ensure the inspection process is smooth. The nominee also has a crucial role in supporting the well-being of provider staff during the inspection, together with the lead inspector. We've discussed how the nominee works with the lead inspector and the rest of the team to suggest where inspectors can find evidence they need, and they have an important role in coordinating feedback throughout the inspection between inspectors and other leaders at the provider. While the role is not compulsory, in over 20 years of having a nominee in place on FES inspections, we have learned how crucial a nominee is in navigating logistics and ensuring the smooth process of the inspection.
Now let's move on to the responsibilities in a bit more detail. So given what you now know about the role of the nominee and what you currently know about inspection, what do you think will be the key roles for the nominee? Think about this in terms of prior to the on-site inspection, during the inspection, and then after the on-site inspection. Pause the video and take a few minutes to list these out. You may have considered these aspects prior to the on-site inspection. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. Please bear in mind that these are suggestions. They might well vary depending on the provision structure and availability. Some of the routine expectations of the nominee role include: following notification, the nominee will usually attend the planning call or calls. This is an opportunity to get to know the lead inspector and clarify any questions you or other leaders have about the inspection. It is an opportunity to flag any sensitivities, reasonable adjustments required, and to help inspectors understand the context of the provision so that they can best arrange the inspection timetable and approach. It is an opportunity to find out who is on the inspection team and check for any conflicts of interest. Through the planning stages, the nominee can begin to communicate the outline inspection timetable and logistics out to staff and other leaders ahead of inspection. They also oversee and support sending out stakeholder surveys, making sure these are sent out to learners and/or apprentices, staff, employers, and parents and/or carers as applicable. Ahead of on-site inspection, it is useful for the nominee to ensure any immediate questions that leaders or staff have about the process are answered. This can help alleviate any anxiousness ahead of the main inspection event. The lead inspector may ask the nominee to consider practicalities and share these at the start of inspection around aspects such as to allocate a base room with access to electrical sockets and the internet that can be used throughout the inspection, whether there is a planned fire alarm, what any parking arrangements might be at the provider or other sites inspectors may visit, so that the lead inspector can communicate that to the team where applicable. To flag if there are any sensitivities that inspectors need to be mindful of, such as recent bereavements or cultural observances, where the canteen is, and perhaps if there can be access to a kettle in the base room. Moving on to during the inspection, here again are some suggestions. At the start of inspection, nominees tend to meet inspectors as they arrive and help them familiarise themselves with the location and base room. They can also bring any new points of note to the lead inspector that may have arisen since the previous day's planning. It is likely nominees will take part in some of the joint inspection activities and, where appropriate, ensure other leaders are able to work jointly with inspectors so that the inspection can be as collaborative as possible. For example, accompanying the lead on a learning walk focused on leadership. The nominee's involvement in the regular inspection meetings means they can gain an ongoing view as to how the inspection evidence is emerging and ensure this is communicated back to leaders and staff where appropriate. Taking high-level notes at meetings is encouraged, so that the benefits of any inspection feedback can be used to help leaders reflect and continue to improve their provision after the inspection is over. Often the discussions had through inspection meetings can provide a lot more practical detail and nuance than the final published report card. Through inspection team meetings, the nominee will be able to reflect and respond to emerging feedback, and where needed, constructively challenge any evidence they feel is not reflective of their provision, and help steer inspectors to other evidence that may not as yet have been considered. The role might also include keeping oversight on any planned reasonable adjustments, arrangements or adaptations to check they are working as expected. Keeping an ongoing check-in on staff and leaders' well-being is something both the nominee and the lead inspector will review daily. Here are some more suggestions of nominee roles through the inspection. This could also include quality assurance arrangements to ensure the principal or CEO and nominee can meet with any senior HMI who is quality assuring the inspection. This might be by phone or on site. In larger providers, it might include liaising with the lead inspector, governors, and funding agencies as to who is best to attend the final feedback meeting, and then agree final attendance with the lead inspector. In some cases, it might involve coordinating the final feedback arrangements at the end of the inspection. As mentioned earlier, the role of nominee is highly collaborative and works very closely with the inspection team. It is worth remembering that when discussion moves on to grading, the nominee will no longer be involved directly in this part of the discussion. It will be down to the inspection team to then grade the evaluation areas based on the evidence collected by that point. And finally, here are some suggested responsibilities after on-site inspection. The nominee will check the accuracy of the inspection report with leaders once it is made available for review, and help to complete the post-inspection survey. This helps Ofsted to review how the inspection was conducted. Keeping lines of communication open throughout is crucial through inspection. As nominee, flagging any issues, no matter how small they may seem, with the lead inspector as soon as possible can help prevent an issue snowballing into something bigger. We are aware providers come in a range of different sizes. We are also aware that the nominee role may be more challenging for very small providers, where there is a limited number of available senior staff who may hold several responsibilities. In these cases, we need to take a common sense and practical approach. As cited in the Independent Wellbeing Impact Assessment Review in September 2025 by Sinead McBrearty, we also need to give consideration to the additional pressure that leaders in smaller providers may face through the inspection process, and be particularly mindful to their well-being in this regard. Lead inspectors will need to be sensitive to this, so that planned timetables for inspection reduces any burden on smaller providers with fewer staff, especially when it comes to joint activities and a separate nominee role.
Now let's move on to some of the changes in the renewed inspection framework that will be helpful to know as nominee. Our framework will launch from November 2025. The supporting documents to the framework will be published earlier, and it's helpful to have sight of the toolkit and framework document as nominee. The renewed inspection framework builds on the strengths of the Education Inspection Framework principles and looks to enhance our ways of working, continuing to put learners and apprentices first in the process. The slide here lists some of the things the renewed framework will implement in an even more focused way. Of course, for FES, the role of nominee is not new, unlike in our other education remits. The framework encompasses the 7 C's, which were the outcome findings from the Big Listen back in 2023. These were children and learners first, ensuring every aspect of Ofsted's work should prioritise children and learners' needs above all. care and well-being. This emphasised that inspectors must demonstrate empathy and concern for the mental health and well-being of staff and leaders. Consistency of inspections. This C was about inspections being more uniform, ensuring inspectors have relevant expertise and follow processes reliably. Content of our frameworks. Inspection frameworks need tailoring. They need to be appropriately designed for different provider types and contexts. Complaints. While we do our best to resolve any concerns through the inspection process, where there are formal complaints raised about inspection, we want the handling of complaints to be more transparent, open and responsive, making it easier for people to raise concerns. Constructive feedback and reporting. We want inspection reports to offer actionable, nuanced feedback, not just summative judgments, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. Consequences of our judgments. The impact of single-word overall grades is burdensome. Ofsted commit to working with government to reform how judgments are reported. So why do these C's matter? Well, if we think about the following key benefits, prioritising learners and well-being, bullets 1 and 2, this places the human impact of inspections front and centre. Improving reliability, bullets 3 and 4. This builds trust by ensuring fairness and contextual understanding. And enhancing accountability, which is bullets 5, 6 and 7. This encourages constructive dialogue and reduces anxiety linked to inspections. So let's talk now about the renewed framework and the toolkit. What's the same? Well, at headline level, we're building on the strengths of the education inspection framework and the approaches that we know have worked effectively. Safeguarding remains central to every inspection. It's still reported separately as either met or not met, but it's not automatically linked to leadership and governance. We will continue to inspect with professionalism, courtesy, empathy and respect. A core part of the focus of our work remains on a provider's curriculum and the substance of education. We will continue to gather evidence from a range of activities to grade each evaluation area. And as you know, safeguarding remains a binary judgment, even though the language has changed. What might look different, echoing what we mentioned earlier, is the further transparency and the increased levels of ongoing dialogue. There's also a much greater emphasis on inclusion and learners who may face barriers to their learning and or their well-being, recognising that if we get provision right for the most vulnerable, we get it right for all. Well-being is at the forefront of the renewed framework. It's part of the way we inspect. We've built on all the work already in place, training for inspectors, our internal hubs, and of course our internal support materials. Inspectors are reminded to consider workload, emotional safety, and the pressures of inspection at every stage, from the planning call to the final feedback. The leadership and governance evaluation area includes specific prompts on how well leaders protect and promote staff well-being. The inspection toolkit is the backbone of the renewed framework. It sets out in plain language the standards and evaluation areas that inspectors will use to determine quality. Every inspector works from the toolkit to ensure consistency and transparency. Each toolkit describes what high-quality practice looks like and the types of evidence inspectors will consider. Importantly, it's published openly so providers can see exactly what informs inspection findings. While the overall structure is the same across all remits, each sector's toolkit includes detail that reflects its specific context. The toolkit tells inspectors what to look at. The operating guide tells them how to look at it. This is our internal manual for applying the framework in a consistent, fair and professional way. It covers everything from the planning call to the daily structure of inspection to how evidence should be recorded. There's a core operating guide for all inspections, with each remit having its own operating guide, or as we lovingly call it, the OG. The inspection information page provides a broad overview of inspection methodology, mainly for providers and for the general public. In practice, inspectors work with both the toolkit and the operating guide side by side. The toolkit sets out the evaluation areas and the standards. The operating guide ensures that these are applied consistently and professionally. Together, they give inspectors confidence in their evaluations, and give providers confidence that inspection is fair and transparent. They also underpin the professional dialogue between inspectors and leaders at every stage. The report card is the new format for communicating inspection findings. It's designed with its audience in mind, parents, carers, as well as others who want to understand the outcome quickly and to learn more about the provider and what it's like to be a learner or an apprentice there. Each section reflects the evaluation areas in the toolkit, setting out the inspection grade and a short, precise summary of the evidence behind it. The report card should give readers a clear picture of the quality of provision, why inspectors reach their evaluations, and what matters most for learners and apprentices going forward. Here you can see the 5 grades in the renewed framework. Remember, each evaluation area will be graded separately. There's no longer an overall effectiveness grade. And as you can see on the slide, these grades are exceptional. Practice is exceptional. It's of the highest standard nationally, and other providers can learn from this. Strong standard. The provider reaches a strong standard when leaders are working above the standards expected of them. Expected standard. The provider is fulfilling the expected standard of education and/or care, and it means that they're following the standards set out in statutory and non-statutory legislation and the professional standards expected of them. Needs attention. The expected standards are not met, but leaders are likely able to make the necessary improvements. And finally, urgent improvement. This is where a provider needs to make urgent improvements to provide the expected standard of education and/or care. Here's a snapshot of our new report card. The New Look report was tested thoroughly with stakeholders, including parents, providers, children, learners, and it was tested in terms of its ease of navigation, the information, and access. Each of the evaluation areas will have a drop-down box where more detail can be found about the grade. And remember, safeguarding will show as either met or not met, and we'll have a short summary as to why, also in a drop-down box.
So, now we're going to spend a few minutes considering some inspection scenarios and how we might respond to them. We can never predict every circumstance that might happen on an inspection, so these are just some examples to get us thinking.
There are 5 scenarios altogether, and we'll consider each one in turn. I'll introduce each scenario, and I suggest you pause the recording to think about your response before moving on. Scenario number 1. The inspector asks for the most recent endpoint assessment grades. You cannot locate them, and the person who knows what they are or where they're stored is currently off sick. What would you do as nominee? Here's what you may have considered. Explain to the lead inspector the predicament in question. Collaborate with the lead inspector to identify and gather alternative sources of information that offer insight into apprentices' achievements. In conjunction with the lead inspector, consider any other inspection activity that might help contribute to this evidence. And in summary, there is nearly always a way around things like this. Raising them as early as possible and talking them through with the lead inspector is the best way to try and resolve such issues. This is what inspectors are trained to do and respond to, and they can discuss with you the best way forward. Scenario number 2. 2 governance representatives are due to be in a meeting with inspectors, but they have contacted you to say that they are significantly delayed by a road closure and are unlikely to make it by the end of the day. They are concerned that they won't be able to speak with inspectors, and therefore this will look bad for the provider. One of them is worried that they are unavailable after this day. What would you do as nominee? Here's what you might have considered. Discuss with the lead inspector and other leaders the options and alternatives that can be considered, which could be rearranging the meeting, having it at the end of the day, if this is practically possible, and if it is the governance representative's preferred solution, or holding it by a Teams call instead the next day. So, in summary, sometimes these things happen. The best solution is to work through the alternatives that work best for all involved. And while it may not be the first preferred option, we can work around these circumstances to ensure that the same information and evidence can be sought through other means. If the meeting needs to be moved to the next day, then it might mean that we're unable to meet with one of the governance representatives as planned, but we can meet with others potentially. The representative that is unavailable the following day may wish to email some bullets through so they can relay any key points that they would like inspectors to be aware of through their inspection discussions. We would need to give extra consideration to any meetings that go on beyond the end of the day, in terms of both well-being of staff, but also of inspectors. It is best to try and discuss an agreed approach that can meet all needs and keep the demands on time manageable. Scenario number 3. You are the nominee. A member of staff contacts you ahead of the inspection and is really anxious. They state that they don't want to be observed or interviewed by inspectors as part of the inspection. What would you do as nominee? Again, here's what you may have considered. Find out what the member of staff's concerns are. Provide reassurance about how inspection works. Reiterate that inspectors do not observe or feed back on individual practice. Offer for them to go to meetings with another colleague for support and let the lead inspector know. If you are concerned about their level of anxiety, you will need to raise this in the planning calls with the lead inspector so that you can discuss the best way forward. In summary, as the slide says, you would of course follow the process you would normally do in providing pastoral care for provider staff. Some level of anxiety can be normal, particularly if someone hasn't been involved in an inspection before. However, we would never want anyone's well-being to be detrimentally affected by the process. It's important that you, as the nominee, feed this directly into the inspection. If the lead inspector is made aware early on through the planning stages of the inspection, they can ensure that the additional levels of sensitivity can be applied in particular cases where levels of anxiety might be high. We would encourage anyone due to meet with inspectors on a one-to-one basis to take along a colleague if they're feeling nervous. This can help reassure them, but also help them reflect on their discussion with someone afterwards so they're clear about any follow-up points they may need to pursue. However, if a meeting with inspectors is making them unwell, the nominee should look for an alternative member of staff to attend the meeting. Scenario number 4. A member of staff approaches you feeling frustrated after an earlier meeting between an inspector and a group of teachers. They explain that although the inspector covered a lot of information, they did not feel able to fully express their views and had more to contribute on the topic or topics discussed. What would you do as nominee? You may have considered the following. Ask what points that member of staff felt they could not get across. Explain that you will raise this with the lead inspector and ensure that inspectors will hear the points in question. Discuss with the lead inspector the best way to ensure that members of staff have their views heard, and feed back to the member of staff the action you and the inspection team have taken to ensure this happens. So, in summary, it might well be that the points raised by the member of staff can be relayed by the nominee to the lead inspector, or where applicable, the team inspector can take a note of it in the evidence base. It might be that in discussion with the lead inspector, a member of staff can chat directly with an inspector about their thoughts or join another meeting to relay their views. Inspectors try and involve and capture everyone's views in a meeting. Often inspectors will leave a little time at the end of a meeting to enable any additional points to be raised that perhaps haven't already been covered. However, in larger meetings, it can be difficult to cover absolutely everything in the time, so inspectors will often focus on particular lines of inquiry through a meeting and explain this at the start to help manage expectations. We wouldn't want any staff member feeling that they haven't had their say in a meeting. So as nominee, it is important to raise any concerns, like the ones outlined in this scenario, with the lead inspector so that a solution to any discontentment can be found quickly. Scenario number 5. Through the discussions and ongoing reflection meetings with inspectors, The grading of achievement is emerging as expected standard. This contrasts with the provider's own evaluation of this area of strong standard. You are clear as to how and why inspectors are drawing these conclusions because as nominee you have been accompanying inspectors or taking part in some inspection activities. Other senior leaders are not in agreement with this emerging picture. What would you do as nominee? So you might have considered the following. Relay the evidence that supports the emerging grade back to leaders. Highlight to leaders where there may have been activities completed jointly and where views have aligned between the provider staff and the inspection team or lead. Identify with senior leaders any additional evidence that may be presented to the inspection team. And help ensure best use of the remaining time regarding the inspection timetable and any priorities. So, in summary, occasionally, particularly in larger providers, those leaders who are less directly involved in the inspection process may not have seen and heard of all of the emerging first-hand evidence. It is therefore helpful in the role of nominee to ensure leaders get to frequently hear the fullest picture and update about why things might be emerging as they are. In some cases, evidence to support a particular grade might be overwhelming, and no matter how much more additional evidence is pursued, it cannot undo the picture emerging. In these circumstances, ensuring that all leaders know where and why this is the case means that the remaining inspection time can be better prioritised to cover areas where evidence is very much still in the balance. We are now moving on to a quick refresher. You have just listened to an array of information about the role and responsibilities of the nominee within the renewed inspection framework. We will now take you through a short series of statements which are either true or false to clarify some of this key information. Statement number 1. Consider if this statement is true or false. The nominee's role can extend before, during and after the on-site inspection. The answer is true. The nominee's role involves being involved in inspection from the points of planning before the on-site inspection, throughout the inspection itself, and can support in the report writing and evaluation of inspection afterwards. Statement number 2. True or false? Anyone in a provider can hold the role of nominee. The answer here is false. The nominee should have a detailed understanding of the provider's programs and operations, be sufficiently senior to ensure the cooperation of staff at all levels, and have authority to carry out the role with autonomy. Here's the next statement. True or false? A member of staff who is an Ofsted inspector can take on the role of nominee. The answer is true. If a member of staff is an Ofsted inspector, they can take on the role of nominee. Here's the next statement. True or false? The CEO or principal may take on this role if they wish to and feel able to. The answer here is true. And remember, in smaller providers, this is often the case. And the final statement, true or false? The nominee can be directly involved in the discussions on grading. The answer is false. While the nominee can sit in on any discussion about grading, they cannot discuss grades directly once inspectors move to grading the evaluation areas. Of course, up until that point, they can have input on any discussion about evidence that will be used to formulate any grade. So we're just going to finish with some key takeaways. The main role of the nominee is to support clear, transparent communication and to aid a smooth inspection process. Another key aspect is also supporting staff well-being. Nominees can help advise the inspector or inspection team where additional evidence could be usefully found. And nominees can help coordinate the feedback arrangements between leaders and inspectors throughout the inspection. Thank you for listening to this webinar.